first time in my life, I am proud of myself because I finally read The Hobbit, and this has been on my TBR for literally years, since I was a wee child. But it has taken me so long to pick up this book and read it. I don't know why. There's no justification because this is a short book. Less than 300 pages, really easy writing style. I have finally read The Hobbit. This is a legendary book. I feel like every single person and their parents and their grandmothers and their dogs have read this book, and I was so late to the party with it. So this is my long-awaited review of The Hobbit. I can't believe I'm holding this book, having read it finally. Genuinely the book that has been on my TBR for probably the longest ever. That and Lord of the Rings. So if you're excited to hear my thoughts on this book, then please give it a thumbs up to let me know, and let's delve into it. I don't want to waste your time. So let's get cracking. Just as a disclaimer, the first half of this video will contain no spoilers at all. So if you are late to the party as well and you've not read this book, then don't worry, you can watch some of this video and it will not spoil a thing for you. However, the second half of the video will contain spoilers. If you have not heard of J.R.R. Tolkien, I don't have words for you. Probably the most influential creator of fantasy stories to ever exist, right? I mean, this book was released in the 1930s and it's sparked inspiration for so many other fantasy stories to come from it. Like, there are so many fantasy books that I have read that clearly took motivation and inspiration from anything that Tolkien wrote. The Hobbit is the prequel to the amazing Lord of the Rings series. I would class this book as short. It's less than 300 pages and the font size is quite big. So I would say that this is a very quick, easy book to read, but that is just personal to me. That's just what I think. I read this book in one day. I actually filmed a 24-hour reading challenge where I set myself the goal to read as much as I could in 24 hours. This book was included in that challenge. I read this book in, I think, around maybe 4 or 5 hours, I think it took me to read this book with breaks in between. But it didn't feel rushed. I felt like I fully immersed myself in the story and the adventures of Bilbo Baggins. I want to start off by saying that this is such a different writing style to what I'm used to. This book does read like the narrator is telling you a story. It doesn't feel like we are following the characters or the events. It feels like we are being told them, if that makes sense. I haven't read a book with that writing style for a very, very long time, I don't think. And what I mean is there are parts of this book where the narrator actually addresses you and I. Like, there are quotes where it says, "You wouldn't believe what happened next." And it feels like a story is being told to me, like this book is being read to me. And I can only imagine that that feeling is ramped up to the max for anybody who has listened to the audiobook, because then it is like somebody actually is telling you the story. It's almost like somebody had wrote down a diary entry retelling of events and I was reading it. I've just never really read a book that addresses you and I when it's telling a story and it's a fictional piece of work. It was really quite difficult to get used to, actually, just because I am not used to that. I don't read books with that writing style. But it was so interesting and it was so diverse. And I did kind of like it. Would I be tempted to pick up another book that tells me a story like that? Possibly not, because if I'm being honest, I don't like being addressed when I'm reading a book. I don't really like it if somebody is saying, "Can you believe this?" When that is written into a book, it almost takes me out of the story because I'm not immersed in the events. It snaps me back to reality again. Like, oh yeah, I am a person just reading a book or being told a story. I would prefer that I'm not snapped out of the story in that way, and that it's very character driven and that I can follow what is going on through the characters' perspectives and their eyes. That's what I like, when it feels like I'm reading a book through the characters' eyes and through their perspectives and what they're seeing. This did not feel like that. However, that being said, I did still enjoy it. I'm not sure if the main Lord of the Rings books are like that. I think the reason why I could enjoy the writing style of this was because this is a short book. So I didn't mind the narrator addressing me personally because this is a very short book. However, the Lord of the Rings books are bigger. So if that is the same in The Lord of the Rings, then that could be a very different review, and we'll have to see how that goes. To put it quite simply, this book is wholesome, cozy. It gave me the warm and fuzzy vibes that I was hoping it would. This is the perfect curl under a blanket with a hot drink on a rainy day style book. This is the perfect, the world feels too heavy and too crazy externally for me to process right now. I'm going to immerse myself in something a little bit more lighthearted, and that will give me that full distraction from anything going on in the outside world. That is this book. And it was a perfect distraction because this story is so easy to get immersed in. It's so easy to follow the adventures that Bilbo Baggins is going on. There was also a lot of humour in this book. There were parts that were done for comedic effect, like just funny. For example, the names of the dwarves, Oin, Gloin, Beaver, Bertha. That in itself is just humorous. The fact that these dwarves are just named such silly things is actually quite funny. I'm so sorry if you can hear any background noise. That's my tortoise just behind the camera. And then there was the riddle war with Gollum. That was just funny because they were both just getting so frustrated at each other trying to create and answer these riddles. And it also added a bit of fun into the book because I'm not gonna lie, I did actually try and answer the riddles before I knew what the answers were. I didn't do very well, to say the least. I'm not the smartest cookie in the tool shed, and I did not get any of the answers anywhere remotely close to correct in those riddle wars. But it was funny. It just took us away temporarily from the main bulk of the story, and it just added a bit of funny vibes to it, and I can appreciate that. However, although there was humour, there was also some serious stuff going on as well. I mean, the main quest that the dwarves and Bilbo are going on is pretty serious. It means a lot. There's a high value of money involved, and there's a very dangerous creature involved, and they're going into some kind of like mountain volcano thing. It's not for the faint-hearted. And this isn't a spoiler because I'm not going to say who. There are some deaths in this book. Yes, a warm and fuzzy, wholesome read has death in it. Mind-blowing. I think that that is one of the strengths of this book, is that it has the perfect balance between feeling wholesome, being funny, but also having serious, deeper underlying themes. I think that Tolkien has balanced out those three elements perfectly in this book. And I think that that is why this is so enjoyable to read, because it just gives you a bit of everything. This is a perfect book for beginners of fantasy. If you are brand new to fantasy, I would highly recommend The Hobbit. It's got your major fantasy elements in there. It sets the scene for most other fantasy books that were released after this, to be honest. This is like laying the foundations and the groundwork for other influential fantasy series based on The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. I would also say that people who love fantasy and are not beginners to fantasy, I also feel like they would enjoy reading this book because it's a classic. So even though the writing style is not heavy, it's not difficult to get into, it's not massive on the detail, I still think that this is enjoyable for anybody, whether you are new to fantasy or highly experienced in fantasy, just because it's an absolute classic. You have some incredible, influential characters in this book that actually gave me chills when I read their names. For example, the main one coming to mind is Gandalf. Everybody has heard of Gandalf. If you've not watched or read Lord of the Rings, either the books or the movies, either way, you have probably still heard of Gandalf, even if you do not know anything about Lord of the Rings. And he actually plays a major part in this book. So when I saw his name for the first time in this book, it did give me chills because Gandalf is just such an influential character to fantasy. You also have Gollum, again another really popular character that lots of people who have never even read any of these books, they've probably heard of Gollum, and he is included in this as well. You also have Elrond, somebody who again is very influential to Lord of the Rings and the universe. And he is briefly in this book as well, just enough to make me excited to read more from this universe, but he was kind of like sprinkled in there just a little bit. Like Tolkien was like, I'm just going to name drop Elrond here just to give the fans of Middle-earth that extra bit of chill when they're reading the book. That's what it did. That is what it did. And obviously, you have the one, the only, Bilbo Baggins. Again, a character that I had heard of very, very regularly throughout my life before I'd even picked up The Hobbit. And this book is centred around Bilbo Baggins and his adventure with the dwarves and Gandalf. And Bilbo is quite like a homebody. He's like a hermit, basically. I actually felt like I resonated a lot with Bilbo at the start of the book. He doesn't like to go out of his comfort zone. He would much rather just stay at home and live his slow, quiet life. But then he is intruded on by all these dwarves and Gandalf telling him that he has to go on an adventure. And for somebody like Bilbo, that will have been really difficult to do. But I think the amazing thing about this book is the character development. Like, it's crazy on the character development in Bilbo. He starts off being this particular hermit kind of person, this homebody, and then midway towards the end of the book he starts to get this desire for adventure. He starts to thrive with the events that are going on. You see him be scared at the start and then turn that fear into bravery. You see him start to just grow and develop as a person, and then it's almost like it comes full circle, because although he starts to get this feast for adventure, he never loses that comfort aspect to him, or that kind of homebody aspect. He never loses that. It's like deep down in his core, and I liked that. I just thought this was great for character development, and it's very clear to see throughout the whole book, and it means that it gives a lasting impact after you've finished reading it. It's just crazy, man. I can take a thing or two from Bilbo. One thing that I love the most about this book, and I will probably feel the same when I get around to reading Lord of the Rings, is the diverse range of fantasy species and elements. I was having a conversation with somebody on my Instagram not too long ago, and they asked me, do you prefer fantasy books where there's loads of fantasy elements, loads of different species and worlds and magical abilities, or do you prefer a fantasy that is much more kind of like humans but with like a little bit of fantasy sprinkled in here and there? I like both, but when reading this, I think I was more drawn to the fact that there were so many different species. I absolutely loved how many different fantasy species we are introduced to in The Hobbit. You've got your goblins, you've got your wood elves, you've got your orcs, you've got your spiders, you've got your dragons. That's the main thing. Like, I can't believe it's taken me this long to say the word dragon, but I love dragons, and this book is about dragons. And for that, I freaking loved it. I do tend to really enjoy fantasy books that have a massive range of them. I think it's just because it really does feel like fantasy when it isn't real life. Like, I'm not going to go outside and see a wood elf or a dragon, to my knowledge. So I think that's why I really like when a fantasy author writes about unrealistic things but makes them feel real for that world. To conclude the non-spoiler part of this video, I would just like to say that I loved this book so much. I'm so glad I read it, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Like I said, I read it all in one go. It was so easy to read. I would read it again if I needed a pick-me-up. Like, if I just wanted a warm and fuzzy read, something quite cozy, quite wholesome, but also has a really gripping, exciting storyline. I just loved it. So to conclude this video for today, I just wanted to briefly talk about some spoilery parts that I want to discuss that are on my mind. So if you have not read this book and you want to, then please be aware I am about to share all the spoilers for this book. So firstly, the dragon dies really quickly, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. I think although I enjoyed the whole story and everything about this book, like, I really loved the whole adventure from start to finish. It feels like it has a start, it feels like it has a middle, and it feels like it has an end. I really like that. My one gripe with the story is just how fast the dragon dies. Like, dragons are meant to be really powerful. They are OP, let's not lie. They are so strong, yet it takes 1 hour to kill Smaug. That ain't sitting right with me. Kind of felt like the dragon was not done justice in this, because he literally died with 1 arrow. Now, yes, I know that it was a very specific part of his body where he could be killed. So the whole thing with this, with the way that the dragon can die, is that there is one tiny part of his chest, I think it is, where there's like a break in his scales, and so if an arrow went through there, it would be able to kill him. But if you shoot an arrow anywhere else, it's not going to get through his scales. That makes sense. I like that. It was very specific. it made the dragon feel very powerful because there's like one tiny little part of him where he has a weakness. That I like. That makes sense. That makes the dragon feel powerful and OP. What I wasn't a fan of was the way that the guy, Bard, the way that he finds out about this area on the dragon is through a bird. Like, Bard didn't even discover it himself. He saw the dragon, was like, how do I kill him? And then a bird comes up to him and says, if you aim for this spot on his chest, you'll kill him. So then Bard does. That just feels really anticlimactic. Like, are you not going to make it more juicy as to how Bard actually finds out about this? Like, how is it just coincidental that a bird just comes up and tells him? The pacing felt a bit off with that. It felt a little bit rushed. I was a bit gutted that that was how Smaug died. I felt it was anticlimactic and it didn't fit with how powerful Smaug was supposed to be. I will say that I am happy Bilbo did not kill the dragon. I think if Bilbo had killed him, that would have been predictable. And I was really kind of hoping that Bilbo wouldn't be the one who saves the day and kills the dragon, because that is predictable and it wouldn't have made me enjoy the story as much. So I did like that. I thought that was great that it was not Bilbo and it was a character, like basically a side character who kills the dragon. I actually liked that a lot. What I will say was I was not expecting Thorin Oakenshield's death. That was another thing that I wasn't expecting to happen. That was unpredictable. I didn't think that after the dragon died, I didn't think one of the dwarves was going to die. And basically the leader of the dwarves, I didn't think he was going to pass away. So that was something that was unexpected for me. And yeah, again, it stopped it being a predictable story. It added a little bit of grief and loss into the mix. It made me feel a bit sad because I liked him. So it gave me the desired emotions that I think Tolkien wanted it to give. And then the other thing that I just want to say, which I don't know if this was desired by Tolkien or if this was meant to be so funny, but how did nobody consider how they were going to take all the treasure home with them again? So you're telling me everybody is trying to get this treasure from the mountain that Smaug is guarding. They've literally travelled for months to get this treasure and not one of them thought about how they were going to get it back home again. So there's this whole issue where the dragon's dead, they've got all the politics of trying to divvy up all of the treasure and equally spread it across them and the townsfolk. And then they've offered a load of treasure to Bilbo, but then he's like, oh, I can't actually get it back home, so I'm going to decline a load of it. And it's like, did you not want to consider that before you even took part in this journey? Like, why did that not cross your mind at least once in the past 6 months that you had no idea how you was actually going to get all this treasure back home again? I just don't know. It made me laugh because I was like, do you all lack common sense? What an introduction to this universe. I'm so glad that I've read this. I'm even more excited to read The Lord of the Rings. I think Lord of the Rings will be a lot heavier than The Hobbit. That is what I'm expecting. I don't know whether or not I'm right yet. I do think that will be heavier, more information to process, obviously a lot more going on. I think this was just a good introduction, an easy read, and I think it sets the scene for what is to come in this series, and I'm really excited. I also just want to very quickly say that there are some beautiful illustrations in this book. Look at that. Is that not gorgeous? Look at all the line work. It's just gorgeous, isn't it? They look so pretty. I actually kind of want to frame some of these. I've said this before about books, when there's like really beautiful illustrations and like line work drawings, they make me just want to frame them and put them on my wall because they're just so pretty. Reading the first line of this book as well, it actually gave me chills. It's such a legendary first line. I've heard the line many times before. I watched the Tolkien movie as well, and I'm pretty sure at the end of the movie it finishes with him writing that first line. Oh, that gives me chills. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. That first line, I think it's the best first line of a book ever, to be honest. I've never had such an impact from a first line. Anywho, that is my review for The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Let me know what you thought to this book, because you've probably read it before me. Let's be honest, I'm very late to the party with this book. I'm just so glad that I've started my Tolkien journey. I knew that this was going to be the year for it, and I'm so happy I've done it now. Thanks for listening to me ramble on about why The Hobbit is so brilliant. But like I said, it does have its flaws, and you've got to think about how long ago this book was released. You know, it's obviously going to have some flaws. But that being said, I really enjoyed it, and I'm so happy I've been able to film this video and review it for you. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate it. Join our channel memberships if you want access to cool perks. And if you like my content and you want to see more from me, then please subscribe because it's free and it means that you can see my videos easier. I will see you next time, or rather you'll see me, and I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye for now.